Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we're going to continue our series on important healthcare topics. Sickle cell anemia is coming up, but first, guess it's finished. That is the budget and the revenues. Well, maybe the revenues to pay for it. We'll get to that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host.
Well, it didn't come exactly as a big surprise that the Pennsylvania legislature and the governor agreed on a revenue package that would be how to pay for the state budget, perhaps sooner than many expected. This will be the last program we'll have to do on the budget for at least, hopefully, 6 months. Joining me to talk about it is Robert Swift. He's with Times-Shamrock Newspapers, and Marc Levy. He is with the Associated Press. Well, Marc, it did come something as a surprise, I guess, given the fact that for about a week or two, they weren't on the same page when it comes to how they were going to fund it. But before we do that, a 5% increase in the budget, as I understand it. About $1.4 billion, is that right, in new monies? 1.2, 1.4?
A little bit above that, about 1.5. If you count everything, it's more like 1.7.
Okay, great. 1.5 billion. So where is this year's 31.5 billion? I think I got that right. Give us a hint, a clue as to some of, where the money's being spent.
So the increase, the 1.5 billion, is being driven by higher costs for pension obligations, essentially to make up for payments the state wasn't making when it should have been making.
Right.
It is higher Medicaid costs, caring for the poor, health care for the poor, and it is another $200 million for public schools. That's about a 3% increase for public schools. Tom Wolf has made more funding for public schools a priority.
Absolutely.
Pennsylvania, according to federal data, has the widest funding disparity between wealthy school districts and poor school districts. Mm-hmm. Overall, it's a 5% increase in spending. We'll likely see the same dynamic a year from now. Higher costs for medical care for the poor, higher costs for pension obligations, and Tom Wolf pushing for a substantial increase for public schools.
Translation, Robert, he may go back to arguing for an income and sales tax hike, right?
Right. This really search for revenue started 2 years ago, really. The last year, the Corbyn administration, they've come to, this is an agreement now, but it will kick up for sure next year again. Everyone expects this.
Yeah. You know what Robert, what surprised me was the 5% increase. The last year's budget was 2.8. We don't get too much into the numbers, but 2.8%. Okay, that's the last year's budget. Now we're at 5. And the House of Representatives, led by Republicans, said they didn't even want to do the 2.8%. Now they virtually double it. I'll start with you, and then you can. Does that surprise you?
In some of their comments, they're saying, well, we were able to block the governor from going even higher, which is what he proposed back in February. I think it was $33 billion. So they're saying this was a compromise. So part of this is the general compromise that shaped this budget.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, go ahead.
The other thing is that the 2.8% increase in spending, if that's what it was, is artificially low. To make the books balance in 15-16, they moved spending off the books. They postponed payments until this fiscal year. So there were some tricks in there.
All the gimmicks.
And there are some things being done in this fiscal year, too, to keep the spend number artificially low. Yeah. And, the overall point is that, costs are rising much more quickly than tax collections are. And they have a problem, and that they're going to have to fix it eventually.
Yeah. My point about this was that I made over and over again. After a 9-month budget, 9 months in which they didn't get a budget into the fiscal year last year, I think there was no desire to end up through the summer months without a budget and begin to hear from school districts and county human services and nonprofits that supply services that they just were saying, this can't be. I don't think anybody wanted that, right?
We are, less than 4 months from Election Day, and that's what this is about.
Yeah.
And if there was an election this year, they might have gone for the fight again. Yeah. But that I think governs everything they do.
Yeah, but normally they wouldn't even be around in the summer. They would come back, and this year in particular, they're hardly in. I counted once between July 1 or 2 when they went out until the end of this session. This is an election year. They were only in like 14 days together because you have the holidays in September, then you have, the pre-election break. So they really didn't have a lot of time, did they?
No, but you say normally they're not here during the summer, and I think there's a lot of people in that building who are starting to believe that, as one of the representatives, Mike Vereb, says that there is no normal here anymore.
That's a great point. Yeah. All right, let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the revenues. Some of them are controversial. We want to find out if indeed they will cover the $35.5 billion that the legislature and the governor now want to spend. Some of those taxes are controversial, more controversial than others. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, now celebrating 100 years as the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, we're chatting, we think, for the last time for maybe 6 months or so about the Pennsylvania budget. The revenues on paper are in place. We're going to talk about that to support a $1.5 billion increase in the Pennsylvania state budget. Robert, let's start. Joining me is Robert Swift with Times-Shamrock Newspapers and Marc Levy. He's a reporter with the Associated Press. Both of these guys cover politics and government, particularly in the state capitol. All right, let's talk, Robert, first of all, about funding. Let's go to what they call one of the two vice taxes. In this case, we're talking about tobacco. So what tobacco products are getting taxed?
Tobacco is the biggest chunk of revenue they're expecting through some people think. They think they're going to get $500 million from tobacco users and higher taxes. Some people think these estimates are way off.
Way off.
One is cigarette raising the tax on a pack of cigarettes by $1. That's supposed to bring
$1. How much?
$2.60 a pack.
So it's $2.60 a pack. Now I don't smoke, but
$1 to $2.60 would be the new.
Oh
tax,
my gosh!
A pack.
Are people going to be buying their cigarettes out of state? I don't know.
Cigarette consumption is declining.
Yeah.
So it's a declining revenue source.
Right.
It has been for a number of years. That's supposed to bring in $430 million. Then they got a tax on e-cigarettes.
E-cigarettes.
Yeah, that's the vapor.
Yeah, sure.
And then people smokeless tobacco. This has been talked about in this state since 2008.
Right.
Taxing this. We're one of the only states that doesn't.
Right.
So that's a major part of this. The other tax getting a lot of attention is a sales tax on what they call digital downloads of videos, ebooks, apps. This is part of this, supposed to bring in $47 million. This is part of this idea of the state sales tax. Is considered by many people to be reflecting an old economy.
So they're not. What you're saying is that the sales tax does not include many things that have come on the scene, like aspects of the internet, as opposed to taxing. We don't tax food and clothing, but we do tax a good bit. So what does that translate? I mean, an internet tax. Go further on that.
Well. It's a tax that a lot of other states have. There's a lot of different permutations in other states. Some of that is already being collected. It's when you download a game or a book or an app or a video or music from the internet. So you're not spending a whole lot on these items, but the 6% sales tax is supposed to apply now.
Okay, so they're applying, right, Rob? They're applying the 6% sales tax to it, right?
Right.
Okay. All right, let's go to the other big issue on the table. The other vice or sin tax is gaming. What did they do with that? Some of that was controversial, some opposed by the 12 casinos were, the owners and operators were nervous about some aspects. So what now is new and what will be taxed?
So the House passed a gambling bill that would have legalized gambling in various different forms or various different venues. One of them is on the internet, so it would have allowed the land-based casinos in Pennsylvania to put up a website that would allow slot machine style games, table game style games on
sports betting.
Not sports betting. That's still, as I understand it, illegal under federal law. But it would have regulated fantasy sports playing in Pennsylvania and taxed it, but that would have been a very minor amount of money coming into the state. But the House and Senate never saw eye to eye on this bill. It's going to have to wait until the fall at the very least. There's not a lot of session days in the fall because everyone's running for re-election, and that's where their heads are. But the bill, the revenue package counts on $100 million from whatever new expansion of casino-style gambling the House and Senate are going to be able to settle on.
Okay. So they really actually then, you're telling me, have postponed the decision on the gaming aspects of it.
But they're counting on the money now.
They're counting on at least $100 million, is that what you're telling me?
They're also, gambling is also playing another, a much bigger part in the overall revenue package. They're expecting $75 million in licensing fees from a Philadelphia casino that is licensed. The license is pending in the courts, but they fully expect that at some point this casino is going to pay up. And they raised the tax on table game gambling by 2%.
Okay. I'm still having a problem. I don't know how we get the $1.5 billion from what you have just said, and with the tobacco.
This budget is also full of a lot of fund transfers, the one-time revenue sources that Governor Wolf railed against last year. There's a bunch of that, plus there's like a $200 million loan from the state malpractice liability fund for doctors to be paid off in 5 years. So that's part of the compromise.
Yeah, but
that's another way that they are moving costs or funding sources down the road.
But as Robert started out by saying, is this gimmick? Are we moving money from one place to another, and we're going to be back here next year talking about
There's a lot of tricky assumptions that this budget is built on. I'll tell you another one, that they underfunded Medicaid programs in prisons by several $100 million on the hope that they could find ways to save money. But what it could amount to is moving those expenses onto next year's budget, because if they don't somehow come up with ways to save on corrections officers' overtime, or somehow saving money in Medicaid by getting people to primary care doctors instead of the emergency room. If they don't do that, the bill's going to come due.
All right, we'll have you. I think this is a topic that the Governor Wolf got his money for education. I think that was a big concern. He got opioid money, which he wanted, and sort of a compromise. But I think both of you are right. We're going to be back here, or you are going to be back on the Hill covering it again next year. All right, coming up, Joe Robinson joins me for one of our healthcare updates, sickle cell anemia. It's not something that I know much about, but we're all going to learn a lot more about it, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit betterwithcoal.com.
Welcome back to the program. We're going to continue our regular healthcare updates, bringing you some important subjects that we all need to think about. Joe Robinson Jr. joins me. He's the executive director of the South Central Pennsylvania Sickle Cell Disease Council. Did I get that right?
Sickle Cell Council.
Sickle Cell Council,
yes,
but
sir.
I wrongly called it sickle cell. You see, I didn't even know. It's disease, not anemia, right?
That's correct.
You rightfully corrected me. All right, Joe. What is sickle cell?
Sickle cell disease itself is an inherited blood disorder. It's basically, it consists of the blood. It's where the blood is the blood cell is sickle shaped.
I got it.
Because of the disease, and that's where it gets its name. It's an absence of hemoglobin and abnormal hemoglobin in that cell, blood cell. So what happens is that cell takes on an abnormal shape as it's traveling through the body. Instead of going through the tube, nice and smooth, that sickle cell is causing a traffic jam going through the body.
Wow.
And as that traffic jam can occur anywhere throughout the body because the blood circulates throughout the body.
That's a great way to explain it.
Yes.
I've read and heard about it before. It's not something I've done a lot of research on. Of course, I had to interview you.
Yes,
now,
sir.
let's go one step further. You say inherited, so you can't get it from...
It's not contagious. That's correct. It's not contagious. It's not sexually transmitted. It's the only way you get it is your parents pass it on to you. They have to have the trait. If one of your parents, if both of your parents have sickle cell trait, then that suggests that there's a 1 in 4 chance. Every time your parents have a baby, there's a 1 in 4 chance that the disease occurs.
And is there a way to know in advance whether you can get this disease?
All you can do is predict and know the odds. And so what we do at the council is try and educate individuals that are still at the age where they're creating families. Our job is to educate you so that you know the risks.
So, men, women, white, African American, Hispanic.
It runs the gamut.
It doesn't pick out anybody.
Absolutely. Anywhere you would have had a mosquito, because years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was a defense mechanism against malaria.
Oh, wow.
So the blood mutated, and so wherever you would have had the mosquitoes, that includes Southeast Asia, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, Africa, obviously. Everywhere you might find a mosquito, you can get sickle cell disease. So it's Asians, Greeks, Latinos.
Now we have about a minute left in this segment, but I have to ask you this question. Once you get it,
yes,
is there a cure?
There is no universal cure. There have been some instances where people have been cured through a bone marrow transplant. Mm-hmm. But as you know, with any bone marrow transplant, even for a cancer patient, there's not always a guarantee. You get that graft and host disease and the body rejects, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So there's no universal cure for sickle cell disease.
And did I read somewhere where, the mean age you could die at 45?
Yeah, that is correct. About 45 years of age. It used to be back in the early 70s, as low as like 14 or 15.
Oh my God.
So there's been some progress,
right.
And now we're up to 40.
All right, we're going to run to a break. We're going to continue this conversation with Joe Robinson. This is an important topic. We're learning a lot about it, and we hope you are too. At least the host is. We'll be back in a minute.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, we're talking about sickle cell disease. I got that right. Not technically anemia with Joe Robinson. He heads the South Central Pennsylvania Sickle Cell Council. All right. Now, we talked about, the incidence of it around the world. Mm-hmm. In PA, in America,
Yeah.
Wide? Is it widespread?
Sure. There's probably about 100,000 people nationwide with sickle cell disease.
Really?
Yes, sir. And probably about anywhere from 10 to 15,000 in Pennsylvania. We have approximately, in our catchment area, we're responsible for 26 counties, the only organization responsible for 26 counties here in South Central Pennsylvania. And we probably there's a population of probably about 300 or 400 school-aged children with sickle cell disease,
Wow.
as well as adults.
Wow.
So that's
what do
our
you do? You
responsibility.
get a school kid, and
Yeah.
I mean, it breaks your heart. It has to
It
break
does.
your
It
heart.
breaks your heart. It does break your heart. Now, let me just tell you this too. Now there's a newborn screening, so you see, there's no way to predict it, but you do know
Right.
at birth whether or not you have
You
it.
do know whether you have the cell.
That's correct. You'll find out whether you have the disease or trait at birth now, and all over this country actually. Every state has a newborn screening. But yes, these kids go to school, and because of this disease, the best way to treat it, not cure it, is to drink plenty of water to stay hydrated.
You're supposed to do that anyway.
But think about it. If you got these blood cells moving through and getting clogged, you helping to flush that through. So the more you drink, then what? You got to go to the bathroom. So how many times do you tell a teacher you got to go to the bathroom?
Well, but if they're told about it,
and that's our job, to try and educate.
Okay,
that's our job. And it's same thing with an employer.
That's where I'm
same
going
thing with
to.
an employer.
That's where I'm going to.
An employer.
You have a network, and you're responsible for
Absolutely.
providing this kind of information to go talk
That's right.
about that.
We have statewide. We have something called the Pennsylvania Sickle Cell Provider Network. We get together monthly. We meet monthly. We do our annual advocacy at the state capitol, but collectively, we compare notes and talk about how we can provide services to our people with sickle cell all across the state of Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
And so we do support, and we go to jobs. We will intercede and help an employer understand why this employee needs so many breaks.
You couldn't make this up. That schools and employers. I mean, most people will you find cooperation, don't you? Once you can explain it.
Once you can explain, once you get
That's
up to
what I
explain
mean.
it. Now, I should tell you, we call this the forgotten disease, Larry, because a lot of our clients, there's a stigma, believe it or not, associated with the disease. Just like if you had mental illness, you don't want to talk about it.
Right.
Same thing with sickle cell sometimes. People don't want to talk about it. So the employer may not really know what this person is dealing with.
All right, we got about a minute left.
All right.
Funding. Where do you get your money from?
Our base funding is through state government. So certainly we have a keen interest in the state budget.
The last topic we were talking
Oh my goodness
about.
gracious, yes, a keen interest in the state budget. I can tell you, fortunately, our funding has remained static the last couple of years, meaning that they didn't eliminate our line item. However, over the last 9 years, we've seen a decline in our funding from 2.7 million statewide, which is not a lot.
No, it's not a lot.
2.7 million down to 1.2.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot of money, All
right.
Yeah.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. I think this is a great update. Thanks for
you.
doing it, and hopefully some research will help.
Yes.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.